Welcome to At the Feed Store podcast with me, Erica Lantz, where we talk farm, feed, and everything in between. From industry insights to customer stories, we're here to serve up real conversations straight from the heart of rural America. Hello, this is Erica with Feeders Grain and Farm Supply. Today, I am joined by Rachel Teller. She works for Fertrell, and she is their animal nutrition consultant. So we have her on today to discuss chicken nutrition and how we utilize the Fertrell products here at Feeders Grain and what she has to say overall with nutrition and how their product is helpful for your chickens. Well, thank you so much for joining, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erica, for inviting me. This should be fun.
Yes. So, as you know, chickens are a big deal. I'm sure you get lots of phone calls in regards to chickens and nutritional needs for them. Do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about your background, and then we can kind of start talking about chickens?
Absolutely. So I have always loved animals since I was very little, which I'm sure probably many of your customers can kind of relate to. I went to school for pre-vet, actually. And vet school is very hard to get into. Most people, although again, your customers might know, but vet school is very hard to get into. At the time when I was applying, there were only 27 of them in the United States. So it's a very small population that can actually get into it. Unfortunately, I was not one of them, but that was okay. Because again, as I said, I really love animals. And as long as I was working with them, I was happy. And so as part of the pre-vet curriculum, I had to take animal nutrition, which was notoriously one of the harder courses of study. And I absolutely loved it. And I was like, hey, if I could do this for a living, that would be pretty cool. So then I went on to graduate school. And I actually studied ruminant nutrition and microbiology, so dairy cows mostly. But, again, you got to kind of know a little bit of everything in the nutrition world. So although my specialty might be ruminants and dairy cows, when it comes to chickens and pigs and other animals, it's good to have that various background. I then was a livestock manager for almost 17 years, working with a variety of different animals, doing 4-H projects, market animals, breeding, show, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so then I came back to my background of nutrition, which I've always enjoyed and have always loved. And so I like being able to work with the producers, the people who have their boots on the ground, and being able to help them achieve their goals of what they want to do with their animals through nutrition.
Oh, that's awesome. And how long have you been with Fertrell?
Sure. I've been with Fertrell for about 3 years now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Fertrell, I've utilized it the entire time that I've had this business for or just about at the 4-year mark. But prior to me taking over, we had this product for the Poultry NutriBalancer specifically because we have our feed mill. And so we mix our own chicken feed here, which I absolutely love that aspect of being able to make a chicken feed here. We know exactly what goes into it. And we can kind of kick it off by talking a little bit about that Poultry NutriBalancer and what that does from a feed perspective for chickens.
Sure. So at Fertrell, we specialize in making the vitamin and mineral premixes that you add to your grain mix that's going to make a complete feed for your animals. So we don't actually handle any grains whatsoever, but we work with mills like yourself, Erica, to help make balanced rations by utilizing our NutriBalancers. So the Poultry NutriBalancer has the correct vitamins, the correct minerals. It does have some methionine in it, which is one of the essential amino acids for birds. It is added at the level that is allowed in organic production. So it can be used in certified organic production.
Okay.
And it also does contain direct-fed microbials and probiotics as well, which are all going to aid in the digestive system of the bird.
Sure. And with this, there is a recommended mix that you guys utilize, which we pretty well follow that when it comes to our layer feed that we have. So with that being said, when we talk about a layer feed and we talk about overall nutrition for chickens, with what we have going on that 17% specifically. When people come into the store, they often ask, what can they do from the aspect of, hey, I have chickens, but I also have a few ducks. So can we talk about the nutritional differences potentially between a duck versus a chicken?
Sure, absolutely. So when it does come to ducks and chickens, they are fairly similar nutritionally.
Okay.
Most of our duck producers and duck farmers use our standard chicken rations and recipes that we have out there,
Sure.
with one exception.
Okay.
The main difference between ducks and chickens is actually their niacin requirement. Ducks and ducklings in particular have a much higher niacin requirement to help with their development and production and performance. And so that's really the main difference between what we recommend when we're creating rations for a duck producer versus a chicken producer. As I started to say, though, our duck producers can use our chicken rations. One, because our NutriBalancer is a well-balanced product that does have a lot of vitamins and minerals in it to begin with. We do formulate slightly higher than what the NRC recommends just because there is that range.
Sure.
And so the NutriBalancer alone does have a higher level of niacin to begin with.
Okay.
However, we do recommend adding another one of our products called RC Gold 4X.
Yes.
And so this product is specifically a vitamin concentrated product. It has a lot of fat soluble vitamins, but it also does have the vitamin B complex in there too, which is where you'll find the niacin. It is also based with a lot more kelp. And so it's going to really help overall the animals there too. And so if you add 3 pounds per ton of a chicken feed, you'll get that increased niacin that meets the requirements for ducklings. As the ducks do get older, their niacin level requirements do kind of plateau and taper off a little bit, where that adult layer ration is acceptable to use. But we still recommend adding that 3 pounds of RC Gold in there for that added niacin, just for the benefit of the duck as she is, more mature and helps her overall.
And that won't necessarily impact the chicken side of things if you put that RC Gold in there. That's why we've started to do that, so that we can incorporate both. Because myself, I have chickens and we have ducks, and so I don't necessarily want to have multiple different things that I'm having to feed and keep track of, especially when you have little kids that you're trying to get them to take responsibility and feed stuff, and you don't want to be, oh no, which feed did we do? And did you feed the right thing? So if we have one feed that, then they can be responsible for feeding stuff and you don't have to worry about it. That's kind of nice that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at Fertrell, we always try to recommend ideal, but we also understand that farming is never ideal.
Right.
You're always going to encounter something that doesn't meet what you're trying to do. And so we keep that in mind here at Fertrell. That's why we have Poultry NutriBalancer, which can be used for all classes and species of poultry. Right. It's not Emu Balancer. It's not Chicken Balancer. It's not Turkey Balancer.
Right.
It's one NutriBalancer that we can use for everybody. But depending on the specific class and their needs, we can have some enhancements that we can add to it, like the RC Gold, to make sure that their particular needs are being met.
So with that RC Gold and having it mixed that way and having a 17% essentially protein, could you do turkeys with that as well then? Or what other classes could you have for that? Just so people understand.
If you're talking about breeding turkeys, yes.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, you would not be able to support turkeys.
Yes. So we're talking about layers in general when it comes to that 17%. I don't want anybody to get, what is she talking about? Only feeding them that much? That's ridiculous. So
you can use that for turkey maintenance, for turkey layers. Yeah. That would be absolutely fine. Any poultry that has a lower protein requirement in that adult stage. Quail, unfortunately, you're still going to want like a 20% for their layers. They just have that higher need. And actually, geese, you want lower protein.
Okay.
Most geese can subsist more so on like a 14%.
Okay.
Just because of how good they are at foraging and actually being able to digest forage products. So a lot of times they don't need as high protein in that layer stage as chickens and ducks do.
Gotcha. Now, when we talk about additional needs, okay, so if we have that 17%, the ration, the way that it's, recommended through Fertrell, and we're adding that RC Gold in there, what additional things do you recommend that people have available for their chickens?
Sure. So in the diet, in the ration that we've formulated, we want it to meet all of their nutritional needs. But even though you're feeding it as a flock or as a herd, they're still individuals. And so each chicken, each duck might have slightly different needs. And so we always recommend having free choice grit available at all times. This is going to help them digest and break down what they're actually eating. And we also always recommend having free choice calcium. Sure. Although we do put a high calcium level in the ration itself, again, each individual bird might still have a slightly higher requirement. And so therefore, we know that they're getting the base minimum of what they need, that 3.5%, that 4% calcium. But there still might be some that might want like 4.2% calcium. And so as long as you're providing calcium on the side, those birds can then go get their extra calcium.
Okay, perfect. Now, when we talk about the types, so currently at my mill, what we do is we have a ground product that we make. There are some people out there that prefer a pelleted product. Can you kind of tell us the difference between what a pelleted product would be like versus a ground product itself?
Sure. Absolutely. So even though these are already kind of broken down a little bit, being ground or being pelleted, we still do recommend having grit on the side.
Okay.
Just because obviously poultry don't have teeth, so they don't have anything to grind it up with.
Yeah.
The main difference between obviously a pellet and a ground, product is the pellet has been bound together somehow. And the most common way that happens is through a heating process. And it works very well. And some birds, prefer pellets, which is absolutely fine. And some rations work much better in pellets, particularly ones that have high fine percentages. So we're talking a lot of soy-free diets or something that's going to have a lot of meals in it. And a lot of people don't like those fines and they're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with it? Yeah. So you can, there's a couple of different ways you can feed it out if you don't like the fines. But yes, pellet is probably going to be the top one, putting everything that's a meal or a fine through the pelleting process.
Sure.
And that usually includes the NutriBalancer. The one downside to that is, again, the heat that is generated during the pelleting process can degrade the vitamins a little bit.
So some denaturing that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you do run the risk potentially of slightly lower vitamin levels when you are pelleting, but sometimes the ease of feeding of a pellet outweighs that potential loss of vitamins. You're never going to necessarily completely lose all of the vitamins. Sure. But it just might be a slightly lower level than what you were hoping for.
And we have a really good luck with the ground because, say for my situation, so I have people that have bantams. They're a little bit smaller. It's a little bit harder for them because those pellets are big. And so being able to have that ground, and then you have the opportunity to be able to feed everything pretty easily. And I feel like ducks, some ducks, they love the powder. They make a little bit of a mess with it, but depending on the type of feeder that you have for them as well. And that's always key, when I have people, well, it's a powder. Well, you got to look at what kind of feeder you're using as well. A pelleted type product in a very general, easy feeder is great, but some of the powders, you got to make sure things have a lip on them just right so they're not dragging that feed out. So it's just kind of the things over the years that I have utilized the powder because at one point in time, we had very small bantams, and I knew there was no way that a pellet was going to be effective for them. So again, application is a factor as well. What type of bird you have that you're feeding, because they can be very little. I felt like a couple of mine looked like little sparrows. They were so small. So,
yeah. And I mean, you've brought up, your specific feeders that you have. And And one of the ways too to also help eliminate waste is making sure that your feeders are at the proper height too, so that the birds aren't playing in them and it doesn't really allow them to mess around at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the last thing you want is just to, and it's going to happen, if you have it at that level with them. So those are all factors to think about and be like, okay, we can't be doing that. We need to adjust things. So again, based on the way your chickens are growing, what you have all together in your flock, it's going to vary how that feeder is set too. So absolutely. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, we're talking about chickens. So this time of year, a lot of people are raising chickens for butcher. So we utilize, again, that Poultry NutriBalancer to make a 19% broiler feed for people. Do you want to talk a little bit about broilers and kind of what their needs are? Because it does shift between having layers versus broilers and their nutritional requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing to keep in mind is with our broilers, we're really talking about a really short period of their life. And we're also talking about when they're doing their most growth.
Yeah.
And so younger animals in general have higher needs because of that exponential growth that they're experiencing. And so there's a couple of different ways to look at broiler nutrition, a lot of factors depending on the type of management that you want to do. Okay. So if you are a really intensely managed operation and you know all of your numbers, you know how much feed you go through, and you really want to be on top of things, you can, or we do recommend using 2 different feeds for broilers. We recommend a starter and a grower. So we're going to have a higher protein on our starter, starting between like a 21 to a 22% protein for the first 2 to 3 weeks. And then we drop them down to a grower or a finisher, depending on the terminology you want to utilize.
Yes. Yep.
And that's going to be more like an 18, 19%. And that's going to be from that 3-week point until you butcher them.
Correct.
So we get a lot of really good feedback on this one, because you start them at the higher protein and then you kind of drop it down. You have some really good growth results. You're really meeting their high needs at the beginning and then slowing them down just a little bit, as they're going through. Following our starter and grower protocol and using our standard rations of corn and soybeans, we have people reporting that you can finish your broilers in 45 days.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Mine aren't quite that fast, but yeah.
But when you think about it, people are like, oh, but your minerals are so expensive, or, this,
Right.
doesn't work. It's like,
Right.
yeah, but now I've shaved off a week of production.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we were right at, a lot of times it's that 6 to 8 week mark.
Yeah.
And I think we did ours right at 6 weeks. And when we were doing it, we decided we would do that this last year because the kids are getting old enough. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, we're going to do this. It's been a long time since we had done it, but it's not the most enjoyable process. It's all about meat production, and broilers are a little messy. And just the big thing with them is keeping feed in front of them all the time, right? So I don't necessarily keep track of the amount, obviously I know at the end how much I fed them, but I'm not weighing every day. This is how much. I just keep feed in front of them constantly, and also water.
Yes.
That's also a huge factor.
Yeah.
Now,
people don't think about how water is actually going to drive feed consumption.
Yes.
But, think about yourselves. If you are thirsty or you haven't had any water, you're not necessarily going to want to eat either. So water is a huge important thing too. And, even just keeping the feed in front of them, on average, again, with that corn and soy diet, we can estimate that it's going to take 13 to 15 pounds per bird to finish them out. Somewhere in that range, depending on how good they are converting it and, the actual ratios of everything.
Yeah, definitely. It's a process and it does take a lot of feed, but at the end, it's so worth it, It's so worth it.
So you mentioned about a 19% broiler. And so I got started on talking about the 2-phase feeding.
Sure.
The other option that we give producers as well is, same in your scenario, where you don't want to have to juggle different feeds and you don't want to have to figure out how much starter do I need, how much grower do I need. We do recommend doing a combined starter grower at about a 19.5% protein. Not as high as that starter, a little bit higher than what we would recommend for a grower, but still enough to help support that growth for that, 6 to 8 week period.
Sure. And now my question for you, and it might be a controversial topic, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So when it comes to starter feed, a lot of people want medicated starter feed. I know you guys really don't push the medicated side there. So my question to you is, the unmedicated birds that you are helping with, do you see success with those and people having good luck is my biggest thing? Because again, it's sometimes that's the way we've always done it. So that's the way we will continue to do it. And not saying right, wrong, or otherwise, just I would like to know, based on what you've seen over the years through Fertrell, the success of the unmedicated all the way through.
Sure. So in general, most medicated feeds are going to be medicated with some sort of coccidiostat, which most commonly is going to be amprolium.
Correct.
Which is very harsh. It is a thiamine blocker. Thiamine, again, is one of those vitamin Bs, and it disrupts the life cycle of the coccidia by taking the thiamine out. But the thing is, by feeding the bird this amprolium, this thiamine blocker, it is also blocking their thiamine uptake as well. And so you can run into issues where you're seeing thiamine deficiencies in birds that are fed medicated feeds, because they are susceptible to the side effects too.
Okay.
And so, yes, at Fertrell, we do believe in doing things better naturally.
Sure.
And you can have very good success without having a medicated feed. Again, making sure that your brooder is clean, or as clean as possible, knowing that chicks are going to poop all the time and watch the stuff.
Yep.
And basic husbandry skills. So if you are running multiple ages of birds at the same time, you take care of the youngest first, and then you move your way up. That way you're not spreading anything from the older birds that might have a resistance already built to them.
Sure.
The younger birds that can't help fend things off. But also there are some natural remedies as well that you can utilize that are going to take place of the medicated feed. So again, the biggest thing is preventing coccidiosis from occurring in the brooder and from these young susceptible birds. And so what we actually recommend is using raw milk or yogurt.
Okay.
Starting on day 3.
Okay.
You can fill shallow pie tins.
Oh, okay.
There, with a low level of milk on day 3.
Okay.
You leave it in there for about an hour. Just
Okay.
let the birds consume as much as they want for an hour, and then you pull them. And you're going to do this on day 3, 7, 14, 21.
Okay.
And that is what we recommend for a coccidia preventative.
And so that just basically promotes good health from a gut standpoint, right?
Yes.
Since that has all of the good bacteria in it, and that will hopefully fight and prevent the coccidia.
Correct. Yeah. And so the whole thing with coccidia is not to eliminate all of the protozoa,
Right.
because that will never happen.
Right.
Coccidia are just prevalent. They are,
Yes.
they're here. All animals have a low level to begin with.
Right.
We just don't want them to go crazy in the digestive system and go out of control. And so, yes, by having these good bacteria, the probiotics that maintain gut health, it helps keep the coccidia in check.
So do you recommend that even for, say you get layers as chicks to do the same thing, that same protocol, so that you want to repeat those timing for,
Sure, yeah.
for that?
Yeah. So you would start, so first dose is day 3, and then 7, 14, 21, 28. Basically a once a week treatment after that initial dose, to kind of get them all nice and good. So we have found success with this timeline. So on day 3, 7, 14, 21, 28, again, you provide a shallow pie tin with as much milk or yogurt that the birds will consume in about an hour.
So you want plain unflavored yogurt, correct? Just make sure that
the nice thing about this too is if you do have layers and you're noticing some digestive upsets with them, you can then do this again as well in the mature bird. And you can do it for, 3 days in a row to 5 days in a row, depending on how severe digestive issues they're having.
Okay, awesome. Now, the one thing I wanted to ask if we could kind of flip back to layers. Okay, so you have them full grown, you've had them for, say, a year. When that process of molt comes through, people tend to see a lesser production in their egg production. Can you kind of talk about the cycle of the chicken and is that a common occurrence? And when do you typically see that where your egg production is going to fall off?
Sure. So, molt is, again, a natural process. And it's basically the bird's way of rejuvenating itself. And so the whole point of molt is to get rid of internal fat. And so you can control that yourself. So if you're showing birds one, you want them to molt obviously before show. So they're nice and full plumed and everything. And they're not leaving their feathers at the show because that would be bad. But also if you're producing, and you want to get a little bit of extra production out of your older hens before bringing in the new flock, you can also molt them as well. Now, obviously the production is not going to go back up to that 90-95%.
Sure.
But you still could get 70-80% out of those, older birds that have molted. And so what we do want to do is it's a really restrictive diet that you feed them. You always start off by taking their weights because that's really what is determining the success of the molt. And again, it's removing that internal fat from their body that's going to affect their egg laying ability. And so you take their starting weight. You're going to feed like a 10-11% protein with really, really no energy and high fiber.
Okay.
We do increase the amount of vitamins provided so that we can help support them. Sure. If you're not organic, we can add some synthetic amino acids as well.
Okay.
To help support what the body needs. And, if you're feeding a full size, chicken, roughly 4 pounds, so you should be feeding about 4 ounces of grain per day. You're going to cut them back to like 2-3 ounces of grain when they're molting.
Okay. And
you are going to weigh them periodically, and you want them to lose about 18 to 20% of their body weight. And you're going to feed that restrictive diet until they hit that 18 to 20% loss. And then you're going to put them back onto, their layer feed or an 18% conditioner feed to kind of bring them back into lay. And, naturally, we expect them to start dropping off, obviously, as they move out of peak. So, once they start laying at, 18 weeks or so, they're going to hit that peak at like 30, 32 weeks or so. And that's going to really set them into how well they're going to produce. And then you can expect them to lay pretty good, until they're about a year old, maybe a little bit longer than that, maybe closer to like that 70, 72 weekish mark or so.
Sure. With,
again, some slight drops in production as they go along, just because, their bodies are getting tired. And so that molt really helps them to recover. And you're going to get little to no production during the molt because, again, their body is not receiving the nutrients that they need to support production. It's all about getting their body ready to produce again.
And when we talk about the seasonality, obviously we are in locations where we have all the seasons. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I have found over the years is with the chickens, when the days get shorter, they tend to slow down in laying. How does the light affect the chickens themselves? And, sometimes people want to blame it on what they're, because of what they're feeding, but that daylight is a big factor for them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So chickens and birds are very photosensitive. So that lengthening of the daylight is what encourages them to lay. It is actually what brings the pullets to sexual maturity as well. So if you bring in ready to lay pullets, or if you're raising pullets yourself and they were not properly stimulated with the right intensity of light and the right amount of light, they will never actually produce for you the way that you want them to. And one of the ways you can tell this is if you look at your mature birds, if they have underdeveloped combs, then they were never properly stimulated. And they're probably never going to be productive for you.
And then how do you properly stimulate them to ensure that you have, peak production from?
Right. So you want to bring those pullets up to about 16 hours of daylight. And you can keep it there. Now, your hens, once they're producing, you can drop down to 14 hours of daylight and they'll still produce for you, but they want those longer days. That light tells them that it's time to lay, similar to seasonal breeders in like goats and deer and things like that. The shortening of the daylight tells them it's time to breed. So our brains are hardwired to perform, and react to different things. And so the chickens, their brain reacts to those longer daylights.
Is there a certain kind of light that people can use to kind of help that stimulation itself? Or
so I honestly, you just want to, regular lights are fine. It doesn't need to be anything fancy or special because honestly, again, too high of a light intensity can actually backfire. And then you can cause pecking and all or other sorts of behavioral issues. But the important thing to remember is if you are adding daylight, you want to add it slowly. Because again, you don't want to overstimulate them and have them go, act all crazy. So we recommend adding 30 minutes of daylight every week until you hit your total hours that you want. So if your goal is 16 hours, you're going to add half an hour of daylight every week until you hit 16 hours. We also recommend adding it in the morning. So even if that means turning the lights on at 2:00 in the morning.
Sure.
Again, the birds are hardwired. They know when sundown is and when it's time to roost. So we've actually have found and have had farmers tell us that adding lights in the afternoon does not work because the birds will still resist it. However, you turn the lights on at 2:00 in the morning and they're all happy for that. So that's what we recommend. Again, even if it's, turning the lights on 2:00 in the morning to hit that 16 hours, that's what you need to be doing.
Gotcha. So by raising, of course, my kids, they hatch eggs. That's kind of their fun thing they like to do, collect this time of year and start filling the incubator and hatching eggs. A lot of times we have a light on the chicks all the time, right? Because we use a heat lamp. Even that kind of light itself, do you think that's good for the pullets and developing, for that laying, that ideal comb and being able to set their laying, hopefully future up?
Right.
Is that something that is helpful that way versus, I know some people use a heating plate and they don't like using lights, but obviously as we're talking, light has a big factor for overall production when you're utilizing laying hens.
Sure. So in the brooder itself, light has a different functionality. And so in the brooder, having the lights on is going to stimulate the birds to want to eat. So the longer you have the lights on in the brooder, the more likely they are to consume food. So it's not about reaching that sexual maturity or doing that production just yet. At that time, it's about consuming nutrients and then growing. When you get to that 12-week, 14-week time frame, that's really when we're talking about extending the day length to stimulate production.
And a lot of times what we will do is once you get to that, they start to feather out, we'll just change it out to a regular light bulb. And that's what we've found that helps with it. Granted, we don't do laying chickens per se. I mean, silkies are nice chickens, but they aren't egg laying big production.
They're not productive.
Yeah, they're not. In the past, I had black copper Morans, which that was a different story. That was a lot of eggs.
Yeah.
But that's another factor that we have to remember when we go and buy stuff as well. So kind of doing that research and making sure that, hey, is what I bought really a layer and what is their production? Because some of the heritage birds don't necessarily lay as much as some of the newer hybrid type birds that are out there, the new layers. So that's always a factor that I always remind people when they come in, well, it's because of the type of bird that you have. Do you want something that's a layer, or do you want something that's pretty, in a heritage, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then the factor of the nutrition piece of it. Now, I do have people that come in and they want a scratch grain, and then they get regular layer feed, which is perfectly fine. How do you feel about like a scratch grain with the current feed that you guys recommend?
Sure. So most scratch grains are just your common energy grains. So you're talking oats, wheat, corn. So what you're doing is you're diluting your protein. And so whereas you think you might be doing something beneficial to the birds, it's not necessarily going to help them out nutritionally. Where scratch grains can be used, you can use it as a treat, so you don't want to include it in more than 10% of their daily feed, because that won't have too much of a factor. But when we do get cold, giving them some scratch grains prior to going in and roosting at night, that will then help them generate heat overnight and keep them a little bit warmer. So in general, you shouldn't really be mixing your scratch grains with your what you're doing, because you're diluting the nutrition.
Okay. But if you keep it on the side for additional, like in a different dish, then that's not as... So you kind of have your oyster shell, and you have some scratch grains, and then you kind of have a buffet set up for them that way. And then you have your main feeder full of the layer feed. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like, as long as they're not going too crazy on the scratch, that would be like, okay, well, do we have free choice pizza available? Not necessarily a good thing for everybody.
Sure.
But yeah, it does have a place in it. You can utilize it for sure. But just keep in mind, in general, what it is doing is it tends to just be grains. There's nothing else that's added to it usually. And so it will dilute overall what the birds are ingesting then, if they are consuming a high enough percentage of it.
Okay. Now, on the other side of things, so if people are doing a higher protein for their layer hens, what kind of impact is that going to have on them?
Sure. So protein is actually what drives egg size. That's one of the nutritional factors that does drive egg size. So what we do notice is that in your producers, when their eggs become so large, if you're actually sizing them and grading them and you're getting a lot of jumbos, what we recommend is actually dropping the protein down.
Okay.
Because basically, as the bird goes through her lay cycle, she's becoming more and more efficient at producing eggs and extracting the nutrients that she needs to extract those eggs. And so protein needs to go down over time, because she is more efficient at utilizing that protein that she's eating and creating those eggs. Now, for a high protein diet, we really only recommend those during hot times, when it's really hot and unbearable out, because the birds don't want to eat. You should notice a decreased consumption over the summertime because of heat stress and everything else. I mean, we don't normally like to eat a lot either when it's hot. We get overheated, and the same is true for the birds. And so because of that, we want to increase the protein, knowing that the bird is going to eat less than she normally does.
Okay.
But that way she can still get the same amount of protein that she needs to support egg production, even with that lower consumption amount.
And I've seen you say that. So when it comes to that heated time of year, that really peak summer, when people are, there's so much information out there that people see. I know there's some that recommend putting ice cubes in the water to help the chickens. Is that something that is going to be beneficial for the chickens, or does that kind of impact them overall if you're bringing the temperature down of the water?
Anything to try to keep them comfortable, making sure they've got shade to get into, making sure there's plenty of air movement. I'm fine with, whatever they want to do to kind of keep their chickens comfortable. That's, hey, we're trying everything ourselves to try to stay comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can
and that'll keep them on that feed too by keeping them comfortable, because we tend to be okay with eating if we've been inside all day in air conditioning,
Exactly. And we are talking extreme heat. When people are like, oh, I want to switch to my summer ration already. I'm like, is it really called for? And so we're really talking about when the average daily temperature, so over a 24-hour stretch of time, you're at 85 degrees or higher.
Oh, okay.
So if you're dropping down to the 40s at night and but you're in the 90s during the day, you should still be fine with the regular 17% ration, because that average daily temperature is not going to be 85 degrees. But when you're at that 85 degree average for like 3 days in a row, that's now going to start causing stress on your chickens. And that's really when we talk about increasing the protein and switching over to a summer layer or a high temperature ration, because that's really where, our body is going to feel the effects of the temperature itself.
And you probably don't see much of that in your area. And, the average temperature being 85, that would probably be more towards the south versus, the Midwest and into your area.
You'd be surprised. Yeah.
There's some little stints in there, but not, it's not for long periods of time.
Definitely not. I mean, in Pennsylvania, usually towards the end of July, beginning of August, we are getting that stretch of 90s with high humidity and, all that fun sort of stuff. But I mean, definitely our customers who are in, the South and, out west in like California and whatnot, we definitely see them a summer layer or a high temperature, ration a lot sooner and for a lot longer.
And the biggest thing, when we're talking today is there's a lot to it when it comes to overall nutrition for your birds. But, that's the nice thing about Fertrell and their products is that they help to keep it simple, right? So you already have that balancer there so that we are able to put out a very simple feed for people and take that complexity out of it. Because otherwise, if they're left to try to figure out all of these balances, it can be very complicated. So it's very nice to have a company that, have been around for a long time and you guys have a lot of information to back the NutriBalancers that you have available and that people can utilize it, right? And they don't have to worry about that other stuff. So because there is so much out there and so much, there's a lot. There's a lot of people with chickens.
Yes.
And it's a great project, especially if, you could have them in town now, which is wonderful. But there's a lot of static around feeding chickens and what you can do and what you can't do. So it's nice to be able to have somebody like you that yourself, you have a lot of knowledge, but you also are working with a company that knows. You guys have helped many, many different places throughout the U.S. and have done your research to help the people. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for those kind words. And the other nice thing too is that the price of our NutriBalancer incorporates our consulting fees. So if you utilize NutriBalancer or any Fertrell product that you've either purchased directly through Fertrell or through a feed mill like yours, Erica,
yes,
we offer these same services to anybody who is utilizing these products. So if at any time one of your customers has a question and you don't feel comfortable answering it, you can always call, but you can also give them our phone number as well. And, we offer these consulting services as part of what we do. Just because, again, there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot to weed through and figure out what's going on. And we're going to help problem solve with you. We want to make sure that, again, number one, the animals are taken care of. That is our number one priority, which I would hope that most producers and most farmers, that's their number one priority.
Right. Yes.
But then our second priority is making sure that what we're recommending is doable. So again, that's why, we recommend ideal situations, but we also understand that ideal isn't likely to happen.
Right.
And so, we will work with you to be like, okay, well, is this doable? Or, what can you feasibly do, and make recommendations based off of that?
Sure.
And there are plenty of times as well where people come to us and are like, well, these are the only grains that I have available. And we're like, okay, we'll put it together. But please understand, this does not have the Fertrell stamp of approval because this is nowhere near ideal. But if this is the best you can do, understand that that's the best you can do and what comes with it.
Yes, definitely. No, you guys, I appreciate you coming on today, and your, Fertrell as a company, they have been wonderful to deal with since I purchased this business, and answering whatever questions I might have even prior to taking over, because I've utilized your NutriBalancer products for a very long time. So I do appreciate you coming on and chatting with me today. And we will definitely have this uploaded here soon and be able to share it with everybody. Thanks for visiting at the Feed Store Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Follow us online and check out our full lineup of products on feedersgrain.com. See you next time.